So I'm here speaking on behalf of a team, and so I definitely want to start by thanking Erik Steiner and Alethea Steingisser for their contributions to this project. Start my timer, there we go. So the Infographics Lab is a hybrid research and practice facility that works on challenges and creative projects related to space and place. For over 35 years, the lab has had a focus on using cartographic and data communication principles to support research, instruction, and public service activities. Like a lot of us, we don't just make maps. We work with faculty and researchers to help identify and communicate both spatial and temporal stories and help them organize data they've already collected or data they're yet to collect, and ultimately to help communicate those spatial stories to a broad audience. In addition to the most recent, atlases shown here, which you might recognize, there are examples shown of other interactive online sites that we've helped design to foster public and broader engagement. What links all of these projects is making scholarship and university data available to the public. This can take many forms, from atlases to standalone websites with downloadable data to engaging social media, images, and videos. And our current team shown there, you may see some of these faces around the conference today. So turning to our forthcoming digital project. This is work that's in progress that I'm sharing with you today. The Pacific Northwest Atlas of Essential Work is a collaboration between us and the UO Just Futures Institute. This atlas is about placemaking. It's about how labor and stories intertwine to craft a sense of where we live and who we are. So it's not a traditional atlas in the sense of an exhaustive, comprehensive coffee table book that you might be able to flip through on a table. I've lost my place. This is about placemaking and about labors and stories and how they intertwine to craft a sense of where we live and who we are. We use data and stories through which we can better understand this region and the people who work in it and make their lives there. Through maps, data visualizations, and stories, we spotlight the essential workers who bring the Pacific Northwest into being day by day and season by season, starting with those who may be the least visible or least valued, but whose vulnerabilities are the most extreme. So the Pacific Northwest Atlas of Essential Work represents essential work or hidden labor through a regional lens, a concept that was forefronted to many of us at the beginning of the pandemic. These chapters are intended to continue to grow in this web-based collection of work by scholars and students, and they're bound by their connection to labor, justice, and the Pacific Northwest. The stories that we show include prisoners deployed to fight forest fires in remote landscapes, climate protestors occupying tactical positions along fossil fuel transport lines. Following the tradition of the lab, we've worked with the JFI core team to develop the Atlas vision. This included a lot of whiteboard mock-ups. Okay, I'll admit, only a few whiteboard mock-ups, but a lot of Zoom calls and Zoom annotations. If you haven't found the annotation feature yet, you should. We also worked with the JFI core team to identify the topic experts that we work with on each of the stories. We then work with them iteratively to visualize and communicate their stories. It's a collaborative design process. It's done between the topic experts, the map teams, and especially including the faculty and our students. One of the framing pieces that I'll show you some maps from, because let's be honest, we're here for the maps, is making the Pacific Northwest. What do we mean by the Pacific Northwest, and how do we contextualize the project? So this section contains an essay which is supplemented with maps such as this one. It tells us a story about labor that defines, one of the ways that we see that, it defines the region for the settlers that reflected the land cover and how it has been conceived as both a resource and an antagonist. Still today, the Pacific Northwest is predominantly forest, grassland, and shrubland. Oregon and Washington are divided by the Cascade Mountains, which slope into the fertile Willamette Valley and Puget Lowlands. During westward expansion, these lowlands were sought as an Eden by European American pioneers and farmers for settling. reframing what that looks like, another map from the contextualization section recognizes that Indigenous peoples were here long before the European settlers arrived. If you might recognize some of the work done by native land that we have overlaid. Political boundaries have been imposed on the people and the landscapes of the Pacific Northwest and have played a large part in shaping labor in the region. Turning to one of the stories that's in progress. I'll share with you some of the descriptions written by students that have been working on this project. Many Oregonians recognize that the smoky skies of fire season signal the seasonal deployment of skilled firefighters, people who work long hours and in extreme conditions to control and extinguish wildfires. Most people will not be aware that among these are hundreds of incarcerated prisoners from across the state who are sent to work directly on the fire lines or in camp support. To make this group of essential workers more visible and to stimulate conversation about larger issues of incarcerated labor, Professor Lee Johnson and Troy Brundage of Geography are collaborating with the Infographics Lab to analyze where, when, and how many incarcerated firefighters work on fires in Oregon. In the wildfires that consumed Oregon around Labor Day 2020, which are vivid in the memories of anyone that was in the area, more than 150 Oregon prisoners fought on fire lines, usually earning well under $1 an hour. This map is a draft which shows the Oregon Department of Forestry response areas and fires with the Department of Corrections, or DOC, deployments from 2015 to 2021. Because there was little prior research on incarcerated firefighting in Oregon, this project takes an exploratory approach. Professor Johnson reached out to the DOC using a public records request. And from that, there was a fair amount of work to digitize and geolocate the prisoner deployment data. Even then, these records were not immediately useful for our type of analysis visualization. So it took dozens of hours investigating unclear entries and analyzing records to create a comprehensive data set with information about the state's 10 institutions with firefighting programs, which are shown also on the map. In total, across the 6 years, incarcerated individuals spent approximately 46,000 person days working on 324 fires. From this data, we created 3 types of main visualizations that help reveal the invisible human labor contributed by the incarcerated individuals. So I mentioned how many people days there were, and that's something we break down here. So this is the unit of measurement used by the DOC to record labor. The labor of the firefighters is not done by hour, but rather by person and day. So, for example, that might be 1 individual working at a fire for 3 days, or it might be 3 individuals working at a fire for 1 day. We just get a lump number on the top, a little bit dehumanizing how many people were actually there. But by all indications, the demand for fire suppression and management labor is set to increase, raising crucial questions of climate justice for unfree labor in the American West. The visualization, let's see, there we go. On the right shows the timeline of deployments to a specific fire, broken down by calendar day, aiming to add a little bit more of a human and temporal dimension to the location-only points on the map. The timelines display how many crews worked from which institution, what type of work they performed, whether it was directly on performing suppression on the fire line or at the camp performing support for the other firefighters there. These visualizations also seek to provide a granularity and specificity about what work on the actual deployments is like, allowing readers to imagine crews working for several days together in fire suppression or camp support. And these timelines vary in showing the patterns of what it looked like to be deployed to a fire. We also have a locator map in the top that shows which institutions and how far the prisoners had to travel to reach the fire that they were working at. This pie map visualization shows just a single year. We have one of these for each year. It's a series of maps that show where and for how long each institution sent incarcerated people to fight fires across the state. These maps transform the coordinates of person day sums into real places and magnitudes to highlight the differences across years and institution into where and how much incarcerated labor is deployed. Last is a screenshot of an interactive tree map, which includes all year's deployments to fires with scaled boxes showing the number of person days worked by fire. You can see the large red boxes. They're the majority of deployments that include larger person days per incident. So there were a few fires that the incarcerated individuals spent numerous days at. The smallest boxes you can see are the many numerous lesser-known fires, ones that don't receive names, like the big ones. And that actually shows the large number of small fires that are out of the public eye that the incarcerated individuals are used to suppress, further decreasing the visibility of their labor. And I might show you an example of what that actually looks like as an interactive. So we can see that it was 20 fires that accounted for half the labor. And of the small fires, we actually have 234. And then we can break down and actually see what type of work was done at each fire. Actually, I had one more to say. So through these visualizations, Johnchid and Bundridge and the JFI are now revising their initial questions with new data-driven insights into how incarcerated firefighting has differed across years and by institution. In another work in progress, we have a collaboration with Aaron Moore, professor of architecture, entitled Lines, Pipelines, and Fossil Fuel Resistance in the Pacific Northwest, examining a slightly more abstract interpretation of essential work. In this chapter, we're using relational maps and architectural section drawings to explore the spatial nature of fossil fuel resistance in the Pacific Northwest. Our purpose is to uncover new understandings of the relationship between the space of fossil fuel transportation and the space of fossil fuel resistance. This project focuses on the period starting from 2010 until 2022, when massive amounts of coal, oil, and gas traveled across the region in train cars, existing pipelines, and when global markets incentivized the construction of new fossil fuel export infrastructure. Here, regular acts of resistance to fossil fuel transportation and construction were documented in popular media. Get my mouse back. Thank you. Specifically, we are mapping the regional and local geographies of resistance, where protest workers disrupt this flow in 5 categories or spaces: at corporate offices, in public civic spaces, directly on the water, physically blocking rail lines, and right at the sites of pipeline projects. These mapped events include blockades, marches, die-ins, and even, and if you haven't heard this one, kayaktivism. Like other forms of essential work, the labor of fossil fuel resistance is in the service of human and ecosystem health and in protection of the region, the Pacific Northwest itself, rather than in service of individual or corporate profit. These anti-fossil fuel activists whose resistance we map thus are considered essential workers to the region, engaged in labor that will shape regional and global climate futures. So let's delve a little into that water space. I'll read you a passage from the Atlas. Protesters have regularly used boats, bridges, and their own bodies to impede the shipping of equipment for fossil fuel drilling rigs through the Pacific Northwest waterways. In these actions, protesters have obstructed oil industry ships by rappelling from bridges and paddling individually in groups in kayaks and traditional canoes. These actions have been especially resonant, including in the media, when the scale of the protesters is dramatically dwarfed by the scale of the ships they are obstructing. In many of these actions, the protesters were able to use their own bodies and small boats to obstruct ship movement because of the inherent narrowness of the shipping channels. Faced by protesters, the ships could not circumvent the obstructions, but were forced to wait under the eye of media and the public. Here we depict a protest from 2015 where rappellers and kayakers surrounded an Arctic-bound oil drilling rig in Seattle. These acts of resistance are framed as essential work in the Pacific Northwest, exposed as labor on the front lines, and the fight against emission-driven global climate change, ecocultural harm, and infringements on Indigenous sovereignty. This chapter takes the form of a narrative text, maps, and a database of protests, and a series of detailed elevation drawings by collaborating master student McLean Gonzalez, which I'm showing you right now, illustrating the physical and human scale spaces around selected protests. As these graphics zoom in, they're intended to visually grapple with the dramatic power and scale differentials at work between the human body, industrial machinery, and corporate architecture. They make concrete and proximate what is often abstract and distant, where local acts of disruption can have an outsized effect on the global fossil industry. And I'll also bring you over here where we see, I'll get it up a bit, a little more progress into this one particular space and the series of cataloged protests that are shown in this particular water space. So I hope you enjoyed these snippets of these projects. Some of the pages of the Atlas are still under development, and other pages are still in review. So we invite you to join our newsletter and our mailing list, to follow us on social media, maybe, to watch for its release. In the meantime, I know we've got plenty of time for questions, so I look forward to your feedback on this work in progress. And of course, a major thank you to the contributors, including the JFI team and topic experts, such as Aaron Moore and Lee Johnson, and the infographic staff and students, especially McLean Gonzalez and Eden McCall, whose work and words I've shared with you today. Thank you.
Joanna, we do have time for some questions. Please raise your hand and come in and sit down. There's lots of seats if you want. Yeah, question in the back.
I really love this work, Joanna. I think there's still a lot of kind of discourse about what a digital atlas is, and I think this does a really good job framing it. What's your intended audience for this?
So I'll repeat the question so the recording and anyone else can hear that. The question was about, there's still a lot of discussion about the definition of a digital atlas, and I will tell you, we have those conversations as we work on developing, as we have been work on developing this piece, from its conceptualization to actually, I was going to say putting pen to paper, but I guess putting keys to code. But the intended audience is trying to reach out to to share the work done, to try and share the work being done by researchers and students and make it more publicly available. So some of the work, like that I showed with the two main projects that I focused on today, is looking at active academic research and then framing it in an engaging, interactive, and short ways. So we have word count limits, and we prod the PIs to to try and bring their text down from what might be academic writing to a little bit more kind of accessible and public facing of that work. Additionally, what I didn't go into, because my aim was to not go over in time, which I succeeded on, that we also have student project work, which is, I do have the site up right now, but if I go back, the difficulty is finding my mouse. There we go. If I go to the main page, we do have, and there's an example here of zines created by students through a class that is having work that is related to essential labor in the Pacific Northwest. And so the instructor from the course has got permission from the students, and the students are excited to share their work outside of the bubble that is their course. And so that's another piece to this, is again, taking that work that's happening at the institution and making it be accessible and public facing, from whether it's student work or large scale primary research done by a professor.
All right, thank you very much, Joanna.
Thanks, Rosemary.